Welcome back to College Football Addiction, SEC Championship Week. We've got Graham Coffey, Dog Central, on to talk a little bit of a rematch, Georgia and Texas. Graham, how you doing, bud?
Doing well, man. It feels like we blink on Labor Day weekend and we wake up and it's conference championship weekend. I can't believe we're already here, but here we are. So excited to see how it ends.
Yeah, a lot of ups and downs for Georgia this year, but in the place that everyone expected them to be. Do maybe some of those ups and downs help the overall? Just hey, we've been here, we've done it the easy way, now we've done it the hard way, and we're still just back where we're supposed to be. Does that maybe help a message for Kirby to kind of impart to his team?
I think so on a certain level. I mean, they are a battle tested team, and I don't know that that would be an attractive trait in the old format. But now you're in a spot where you have a 12 team tournament at the end of the year, and it's very much more like an NFL style playoff. And what have we seen for years? We've seen teams get hot and basically get wild card berths and go win Super Bowls and things like that. So, Georgia defensively is not playing their best football of the year, but I would say offensively, they probably are. Carson Beck certainly is. And I think for them, with the amount of games that they've been in that have been close and the amount of times they've been behind and come back, there's a comfort level in close games that I'm not sure anyone else that's a playoff contender has.
Before we look at the Texas game, just quickly on Georgia Tech, um, two-parter. One, how much do can you just attribute the Georgia Tech game being close to like the rivalry stuff? Like, can you just kind of say like, it was a rivalry, so rivalries get weird, and or is it a little more than that? Like in your mind, like maybe it's a rivalry, but maybe we should have still won this game by more than 2 points in 8 overtimes. Um, and then the part two of that is the emotional. I mean, we've seen teams often, when you win an emotional game like that or lose either way, and then you have to come back and play the very next week in a game that's even bigger now. So one, thinking about the game, how much do you attribute to the rivalry? Two, how do you follow that up and now get yourself right to play Texas?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it can be attributed to rivalry stuff, like getting the backstory on some of the things from that game this week has been interesting. Like, I'm not, a Georgia Tech reporter or anything like that, so this is kind of more speculative on my side. But like, I have talked to some people that are well connected to that program that in the aftermath of the Georgia Tech game, like they believe that you know Tech kind of sandbagged Haynes King in that NC State game and sort of hid him and made it look like he couldn't throw the ball because they wanted to surprise Georgia. I think Georgia came into that game literally like running option style defensive packages all week, getting ready for a team that I think they expected to run the ball. And don't get me wrong, Tech ran the ball. I mean, they had an 18 play, 90-yard drive in this game that ate up 10 minutes. Like, they possessed the ball like an option team, but I don't think they were ready for Haynes King to be able to throw the ball like downfield as much as he did. They didn't take a bunch of deep shots, but like he made some throws that they didn't expect him to be able to make, and so that surprised them. Definitely caught them like wrong-footed from a scheme standpoint. But yeah, there's concerns. I mean, Georgia Tech ran the football at Georgia well. A lot of that was predicated by the legs of Haynes King, so I'm not sure that it applies to this matchup against Texas, but it definitely applies down the road in the playoff. Like, you're going to see mobile quarterbacks again, and it's been a theme going back to the first 20 minutes of that game at Alabama when Jalen Milroe was just like slicing them up with his feet and his arm. Georgia struggled to handle some dual threat quarterback situations this year, and I think that's a concern. I also think that offensively in that game, I mean, Kirby was pretty honest about it post game. He was like, we kind of got to halftime and we had 0 points, and we also felt like they hadn't really stopped us as much as we had stopped ourselves. And what he's referring to there is all the drop passes that their receivers had in that game, and that's been an ongoing theme throughout the season. It has been a problem. I think that is what kind of first got Carson Beck into a bad spot and had him struggling a little bit to make good decisions, because I think he felt like he needed to force things for them to stay in football games and win football games. He's done a good job of flushing that and just sort of living 5-10 seconds at a time. But the receiver drop issue is not going away for this team. Like, that's going to continue to be a thing. And you're going to have to accept, if you're a Georgia fan or a Georgia coach or a Georgia player, like, we're going to have some plays that we leave on the field a couple times a half because our receivers drop balls. And I think in this Georgia Tech game specifically, there was a lot of like 3rd and 2, or, whatever the situation was. There were a lot of drives that ended because of these drop passes. And if I'm Georgia, I think I want to get my tight ends involved earlier going forward than they did in that game, because those guys have been much more sure-handed than the boundary receivers.
So now looking ahead to Texas and, thinking back to coming off that emotional game, so just as a neutral, right? Like as an outsider, it's hard for me to think that Texas would play. And I don't want to take anything away from Georgia's defense, because Georgia's defense obviously played incredibly well in the game down there in Austin, especially in the first half, kind of just suffocating them. And the game was over, at halftime. I know that they got the touchdown on the bottle tosses, but outside of that, which I don't expect too many bottles to be tossed on the field at Mercedes-Benz, but I did see that investigation cleared up and they found no one at fault. So, it's classic there. But all that said, nothing away from Georgia's defense, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise you at all if Texas played a little better offensively in this game. I don't think that we're going to get the same kind of matchup that we got in the last one.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to.
I'll get right back to chatting with Graham, but first, again, we've told you about this a couple of times. Dogs fans, Texas fans, SEC fans, starting a brand new channel with my friend Allie Peak. She covers the Gators, a peek inside Gators football. We're starting a new channel called A Peek Inside SEC Football, a play on her last name. Her dad, her granddad, her brother, and her husband all played at UF. 2 of them won national titles. We are going to have a ton of fun with this channel covering the SEC from multiple different angles. We're not selling you anything on this video. I didn't put an ad in or shout out a different company. I'd love if you just went over and subscribed for us. We have our first show on Sunday night. We will talk about this SEC championship game. Of course, we'll talk about both teams. I suspect where they're ranked in the playoffs. Just do me a favor. If you appreciate our content, if you appreciate us bringing you Graham and Jerry and different people we've had on to cover this game, hit that subscribe button. We certainly would appreciate it.
Georgia hasn't forced that many turnovers in any other game this year, right? I mean, they got them 4 times. And you go back and look just at Quinn Ewers' throws. He had 7 throws that PFF graded as like turnover-worthy throws. I mean, Georgia dropped a shitload of interceptions in that game. Like, they could have had a couple of pick sixes that they didn't catch. So they had him like seeing ghosts and confused, whatever cliche you want to use. Like, it applied to that game in terms of how Ewers was seeing the field. They got to Arch Manning as well when they put him in. That part probably isn't super replicable, right? Like, I think Quinn Ewers will play better. I think Sark will have kind of a different plan for how to get him comfortable. What might be replicable for Georgia is if you even, without all those interceptions and sacks and all that, which they did have 7 sacks, but Texas ran like 70-something plays in that game. 44% of their plays from scrimmage were either stopped for a loss or no gain. So to me, that was the big like theme of that game, more so than anything that happened with Ewers, is that Georgia stopped their run so well that they kept putting them into 2nd and long, 3rd and long. And once Georgia gets you into obvious passing downs, like, those guys get to tee off, and they've got some exotic and interesting pressure packages, and things really start to flow for them. So that to me is way more important, is like, can Texas run the ball more similar to how they did last week against A&M when they looked really good and physical on the ground, and their offensive line was moving people, and their outside zone stuff, which is kind of their bread and butter, like, that was really hitting well. We had press availability today with Sark and Kirby and Greg Sankey, and Sark kind of said, like, going back to that Georgia game, looking at that tape, a lot of their markers for their offensive line and how they run outside zone was off. I think that their offensive line has been pretty superb since that game. Now they haven't played anybody like Georgia up front, but Texas A&M gave some teams problems at times their defensive line this year, and they handled those guys pretty well. I expect Texas to, you know, not get into a situation where they get sacked 7 times. We'll put it that way. I still think Georgia will have an impact with their defensive line.
We talked when the game was happening in Austin about how unfair it is for Kirby to be considered an underdog. Like just the fact of him getting to sell that for an entire week. And I do still think, I think the line is still slightly slanted at Texas right now, but it's within a field goal, right? Like it's pretty close. So I don't know that Kirby can really sell the nobody believes in us stuff.
Well, of course he will.
You think he will? Is that the tactic this week? Like, can you do it again?
I don't think that's the tactic. I think this is the first week all year that Kirby Smart hasn't been like, let's put it this way. You ever see like a puppy who like hates being on a leash and doesn't know how to like be walked yet? And you see somebody like dragging
all year this year, so a little bit, yeah.
yeah. You see somebody like dragging their puppy down the sidewalk and like the puppy's paws are getting like scratched and stuff because the puppy is just like doesn't understand it and doesn't want to move forward. I think there were a lot of games this year where Kirby basically like was the dude walking the dog with the bloody paws, right? Like kind of dragging Georgia along because these guys have played in so many big games over the last 3 to 4 years that you can't fool them. You can try to get them up for Florida. You can try to get them up for some of these games, but like you can't fool these dudes like Smile Mondin who went 15-0 in 2022 and played Ohio State and played LSU in the SEC title and beat TCU by 58 points. Like those guys have played in too many big games to trick themselves into thinking that some of the games Georgia played in this year were that big, especially in a 12-team era where, let's be frank, you can afford some losses.
Yeah.
I look at Carson Beck, I look at Tate Ratledge, I look at those guys that either didn't go to the NFL or didn't transfer. This is what they came back for. They all made that decision after losing to Alabama in the SEC championship game last year. And now they're back, and now they're in a spot where they can kind of not avenge that loss directly to Alabama, but like they don't need any extra help this week. They don't need any of the like they don't believe in us type stuff. I think that Georgia left Austin with a bad taste in their mouth, kind of feeling like they had been like almost part of a screw job by the refs. And let's be frank, there might be some truth to that. I just think they're going to come out and play well and hard and focused and move fast because this is the game that they've been sort of like getting through all the others this year to get to. Like now is the time of the year where I think Georgia's going to look like themselves.
Turns it on a little more. They certainly do. And a lot of teams do that, right? Like you play up for big games, you play down for games that you don't really care about. It's not like super shocking. Is there a little more pressure on Georgia in this game? Both teams are in either way, but Texas probably still hosts if they lose, unless they lose by a ton. So is there a little more pressure on Georgia to not have to go on the road? They're the ones defending the SEC. It's Texas' first year, all those things. I mean, there's pressure on both teams, let's be real. But
yeah. Well, I mean, maybe. I think there's two ways to look at that. One is the way that you just presented, where Georgia's the lower ranked team, the lower seeded team at the moment, and losing a game will probably hurt them. I would also say Ward Manuel, both on ESPN and when we had him for the CFP teleconference on Tuesday night, like he referenced, I think 3 times 2022 TCU, who lost to Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game on the final weekend of the season, and still stayed at the number 3 spot where they were ranked coming into that weekend. That would be a similar scenario to this in that TCU had beaten Kansas State earlier in the year. Georgia's already beaten Texas. So I actually believe there's more pressure on Texas. You look at Texas, who have they beaten? I mean, they beat A&M last week. That was a good win. But, like, the committee moved A&M out of the top 25 after that game. They have 0 ranked wins over anybody in the top 25. And Ward Manuel is on ESPN citing Alabama's 3-1 record versus top 25 teams as the reason why they got the nod over Miami, South Carolina, Ole Miss, all those teams. Georgia dropped 9 spots after their loss to Ole Miss. I mean, like, is there something that would, like, if Texas gets blown out on Saturday and wakes up on Sunday with 0 ranked wins, are we positive that they're not going to fall like a rock and all of a sudden be like a double-digit seed in this thing, or maybe even be in jeopardy? I'm not, because I've seen this committee do a lot of like incongruent stuff, and there hasn't been much consistency in how they grade these things. So I think there's a lot more pressure on Texas because Georgia's 1-1 against Texas, no matter what happens on Saturday. Like worst case scenario, they're 500 against this team, and for Sark too, man. Like one interesting thing is there's only been 2 teams to ever lose in the regular season against a team and then beat that same team in the SEC championship. One was 2001 LSU, the other was 2017 Georgia. Who were those coaches? Nick Saban, Kirby Smart. Now, all the other teams that, have been in rematch scenarios, the other 4 times, it was a sweep, that the team who won the regular season won in the title game as well. And on average, they win by about 16 more points than they did the first time around. So Sark wants to be in this club. He wants to be part of the Kirby Smart, Nick Saban kind of tier of coaches. He wants to be one of these dudes with a national title who is, one of the best in the sport, in the conversation for best of their era or best of the decade, whatever you want to call it. Like, this is a game he needs to win if he's going to be part of that conversation, because I'm just going to be honest with you, man. Like, Texas has not really shown us anything to this point that makes me say for sure 100% that like they're primed to go win a national title. Yeah. I know they moved the ball well against A&M, but 17 points is 17 points, and that's what they had at the end of the day. And there's a lot of games like that. I mean, Ole Miss passed for like 550 on Arkansas. Texas passed for less than 200 yards on those guys. There's lots of games where you can look at with this offense and be like, I'm not 100% sure that they're that good. So this would be a very emphatic statement for them. And I think a lot of SEC fans really kind of like look at Texas and feel like they're in this game because they had a favorable schedule. There's 6 teams in the league that have a losing record in league play. Texas has played 5 of them. They played 5 of them. They've played a 500 Florida team who was on their 3rd string quarterback. They played A&M, and they got, beat pretty, I think, convincingly at home by Georgia. So this is a prove it game.
I want to get a prediction from you because there's nothing people love more than that. But I'll reverse order on something. Where can people follow you and find your work, bud?
Oh yeah, check me out at dogcentral.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Graham Coffey DC. Podcast, YouTube, all that stuff. Just Dog Central, of course, DAWGS instead of DOGS.
Good stuff. And then people will love this one way or the other. If you're right, the Georgia fans will love it. If you're wrong, the Texas fans will love it, I'm sure. But it sounds like you're picking Georgia, but how do you think this thing goes down?
I've really struggled to like personally handicap this game. Part of that's the rematch angle. Part of that is that Georgia's been so inconsistent effort-wise. So I am not very confident in picking this game. There's certain games that I feel very strongly about. The first Georgia-Texas game, I kind of, put my neck out there a little bit. This one, I could see it go a lot of different ways. I am going to go with Georgia just because I think big games like this, where you have 2 really good defenses, who's the quarterback I trust more? And right now, that is actually Carson Beck. It was not when these teams played in mid-October, but 11 touchdowns, 0 interceptions over the last 3 weeks. And it's not just that number. It's that, like, he is making the right decisions. He's had 0 turnover-worthy plays in the last 3 weeks. Like, he's checked the ball down. He has not tried to force things, and he's kind of let the game come to him. And with these 2 teams, I think this is a 4-quarter game, and that makes me think that the game will probably, be decided late, and Georgia's got that experience late. The last thing I would say is, looking at yours, which I have a lot, like, he kind of gets worse as games go on. Honestly, you look at his, he's a 72.6% passer in the first quarter. By the third quarter, that drops to 65.5%. By the fourth quarter, he's 50% completion, 4.8 yards per attempt, one touchdown, zero interceptions this year. So that was something that I kind of found interesting in my pregame notes. And I think Georgia's defense has struggled at times this year, but against this particular offense, they'll probably do enough to keep this within a possession or 10 points as you move into the last third of this game. And I like Georgia in that scenario just because we've seen them in that scenario a lot.
Graham Coffey, Dogs Central, man, I appreciate you a ton for spending some time with us. Have fun this weekend and good luck on Saturday, bud.
Thanks, man. Always enjoy being on with you.
Thanks, buddy. Hey, guys, thanks for watching. Again, I'm going to link the channel that I told you about earlier right here. It's a peek inside SEC football. You can click this link right here to check it out, and we certainly appreciate your support here on College Football Addiction.